They just wanted a quiet night out. Two young black twins, dressed sharp, calm, polite, stepped into a small-town bar where every stare felt like a warning. The room fell silent, music stopped, and whispers replaced laughter. Still, they smiled, ordered their drinks, and tried to ignore the tension crawling through the air. But prejudice has a way of finding its target. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights painted the walls. Accused of a crime they didn't commit, surrounded by officers whose eyes saw only color, not truth, the twins stood frozen as the crowd watched in silence. Fear met fury, and justice seemed like a distant dream. Yet no one in that bar could imagine who these suspects really were. Because in just a few minutes, the truth about their identities, their ranks, would turn the entire night upside down. What happens when those who protect the nation are treated as criminals in their own skin? It began like any other Friday night. The city lights shimmered over the quiet streets of Millstone, a small town that liked to think it had no problems. The kind of place where everyone claimed to know everyone, and strangers stood out like a stain on white cloth. Marcus and Malik Turner, the twins everyone called the brothers in blue, had just finished another long week of service. Both were U.S. Air Force officers, recently returned from deployment. They carried themselves with quiet confidence, polished manners, and the kind of calm that came from discipline. But beneath that calm, there was always something heavier, an awareness of how the world saw them before it saw the uniforms they wore. That night, they weren't in uniform. Just two brothers, off-duty, wanting to breathe, to laugh, to feel normal again. Malik suggested a drink at a nearby bar, a small place with neon lights and the kind of country music that usually made outsiders feel out of place. Marcus hesitated. "We'll be fine," Malik had said. They always were. Until they weren't. As they parked their black truck outside the bar, the cool night air brushed against their faces. The sign above flickered, "O'Donnell's Tavern." A few old trucks lined the dirt lot, laughter echoing faintly from inside. It was the kind of sound that made you think of home, until you realized you weren't exactly welcome. Inside, smoke hung heavy. A jukebox played soft rock, boots tapped against the floor, and the smell of beer clung to every corner. Conversations dimmed as the twins walked in. Heads turned, not out of curiosity, but judgment. Two black men in a room full of faces that weren't. Marcus felt the shift first, the silence between notes, the pause before words. He'd seen it before, in too many small towns, in too many uniforms. But he brushed it off, forcing a polite smile as he and Malik took seats at the counter. The bartender, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, didn't say much. "What'll it be?" he asked. Malik ordered 2 sodas, neither of them drank much. The man nodded, but his expression never softened. The twins could feel the weight of eyes on their backs. Every sip, every laugh, every move seemed to be under quiet surveillance. They tried to talk about home, about their mother's cooking, their next flight assignment, the medals gathering dust in their drawers. Ordinary talk for 2 men who'd seen too much war and too little peace. But the atmosphere made every word heavy. In one corner, a group of men whispered. One of them, broad shoulders, red cap turned backward, laughed loudly, his eyes locked on the brothers. "Looks like we got company tonight," he said, loud enough for half the bar to hear. The others chuckled, pretending it was harmless. But there was something sharp beneath the laughter. Marcus pretended not to hear. He'd learned that silence was sometimes safer than pride. Malik, younger by 5 minutes but hotter in spirit, clenched his jaw. He'd been through enough to know when something was about to turn ugly. The bartender slid their drinks across the counter, foam spilling slightly over the rim. Marcus thanked him. No reply. Just a nod that didn't reach his eyes. Minutes passed, but the tension didn't fade. The jukebox stopped. The whispers grew louder. Someone muttered a slur, quiet, but not quiet enough. Marcus looked down at his glass, the ice melting slowly. He told himself it was just another night. Just another town. Just another room where they didn't belong. But somewhere inside, he knew, this wasn't ending quietly. Malik shifted in his seat, scanning the room. Maybe we should head out, he said softly. Marcus nodded. But as they stood, a voice behind them called out, mocking. Leaving so soon, boys? Didn't even finish your drinks. The laughter that followed wasn't friendly. It was the kind that turned the stomach. Marcus turned slowly, his eyes calm but steady. He'd faced war zones. He'd seen fear, hate, and death. But somehow, this small-town bar felt colder than any battlefield. They didn't respond. Just walked toward the door, silent. But silence is dangerous when pride feels cornered. As the door creaked open, the sound of sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flashed through the glass. The twins froze. Malik frowned. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered. 2 patrol cars skidded into the lot, gravel scattering. Officers stepped out, hands already resting on their holsters. The crowd from the bar followed, spilling out into the night like an audience hungry for a scene. The whispers turned to murmurs, the murmurs to accusations. Someone said they'd seen something suspicious. No one knew what. No one needed to. Marcus raised his hands slowly, confusion washing over him. He'd been trained to stay calm, to de-escalate. But here, he wasn't an officer. He was just another black man under flashing lights. Malik's voice trembled with anger. This is insane. We didn't do anything. The officers shouted commands, quick and harsh. Hands up. Step back. Don't move. The twins obeyed. Every motion careful, deliberate. From the bar doorway, someone whispered, bet they stole that truck. Another voice added, wouldn't be the first time. Marcus's chest tightened. Not from fear, but disbelief. He wanted to tell them who they were, what they'd done, the lives they'd risked for a country that still doubted their place in it. But he stayed silent. He'd learned, sometimes words only make it worse. As the lights flashed against the metal of their badges, hidden in their wallets, the world seemed to stop. The officers hadn't checked IDs yet. They didn't know. And in that moment, neither Marcus nor Malik wanted to tell them. They wanted to see how far this would go, how far ignorance could stretch before truth cut through. Above them, the night sky was still. The kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. In the crowd, a young woman watched from her car. She recognized them, had seen their faces on the local news just weeks earlier. But fear kept her quiet. The bar's neon sign flickered again, washing the scene in cold, electric light. And as the brothers stood surrounded, hands raised, heart steady, they didn't know it yet, but this night was about to expose more than prejudice. It would reveal what power looks like when it hides behind a badge, and how quickly it shatters when truth steps forward. Because by the end of this night, everyone in that small town would know exactly who the Turner twins really were. The flashing red and blue lights soaked the night in panic. Marcus and Malik stood still, hands raised, the cool wind brushing against their faces as a dozen eyes watched. The once lively bar had become an audience of silence and whispers, each one eager to see how the scene would unfold. 2 officers approached, one young, jittery, gripping his weapon tighter than necessary, the other older, eyes hard with suspicion. Step away from the vehicle, the older one barked. His voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness. Marcus tried to stay calm. His voice, steady but low, answered, "Sir, we haven't done anything wrong." "Did I ask for your opinion?" the officer snapped. "Hands where I can see them. Both of you." The younger cop circled behind them, flashlight beam tracing their backs. Malik clenched his jaw. He'd faced armed men overseas, but never with this kind of hatred in their eyes. From inside the bar, someone shouted, "Check their truck. Bet there's something in there." The crowd laughed, a cruel, nervous sound that fed the tension. Marcus turned his head slightly. "We can explain," he said, calm, measured, like he'd been trained to be. But his tone only seemed to enrage the older cop. "Don't move," the man shouted again, stepping forward, hand resting on his holster. The metallic sound of a safety latch releasing sliced through the night. Malik froze, his breath caught in his throat. He'd seen this moment before, too many times on the news, too many lives ending before they even had a chance to speak. The young officer started to search their truck. He opened the door, rummaged through the glove compartment, the back seat, tossing aside everything without care. "Clean," he muttered, almost disappointed. But the older one wasn't ready to let go. "IDs," he demanded. "Now." Marcus hesitated. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, every motion deliberate. "I'm reaching for my wallet," he said clearly. "You can see my hands." "Just move slow," the cop warned, voice thick with suspicion. Marcus handed over both IDs, his and Malik's. The officer snatched them, eyes squinting under the flickering light of the patrol car. He studied the cards for a moment, confusion crossing his face. "These are fake," he muttered. Marcus frowned. "They're not fake, sir. Check the rank." The officer glanced again, reading the bold letters, Captain Marcus Turner. First Lieutenant Malik Turner. United States Air Force. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, but pride is a heavy chain. "You expect me to believe that?" he said coldly. "You think just printing some fancy cards makes you military?" The laughter from the crowd returned, sharper this time. Someone yelled, "They probably stole those too." Marcus's calm began to crack. "We've served this country. We've bled for it," he said, voice trembling but strong. "You can verify it right now. Call it in." But the older cop didn't move. He seemed to enjoy the power, the control. Malik saw the smirk forming at the edge of his mouth, a look he'd seen before in men who believed they'd already won. Then the younger officer spoke. Sarge, the truck's registered to the Department of Defense." Silence. The older officer froze, his grip tightening around the IDs. His pride wavered, but only for a second. "Could be stolen," he snapped. "We'll sort it out downtown." He motioned to cuff them. Marcus stepped back instinctively. "Cuff us? For what?" "For resisting investigation," came the answer. The words felt heavy, absurd. Malik laughed bitterly. "You're arresting 2 Air Force officers for existing?" That was the moment the crowd's whispers turned into chaos. Some pulled out phones, recording. Others just stared, waiting for something to happen, some desperate for a show, others silently praying it wouldn't go where it looked like it was heading. The young officer hesitated, his expression softening. "Sarge, maybe we should." "Do it," the older one barked. The clink of metal cuffs echoed like thunder. Marcus's heart pounded as cold steel wrapped around his wrists. Malik's breath came out in short bursts, anger and disbelief mixing into something heavier, something that burned. They were shoved toward the patrol car, their heads lowered, the crowd still watching. Somewhere in the distance, a phone camera light blinked. Every flash, every click, was another wound. Inside the car, the world seemed smaller. The air was thick with humiliation. Marcus looked at his brother, their reflections trembling in the glass. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Let them find out the truth themselves." But Malik couldn't calm down. His voice cracked, raw with emotion. "How many times do we have to prove we belong here, Marcus? How many?" The car doors slammed. The sirens wailed again, echoing down the empty streets of Millstone. At the station, everything felt colder. They were led through a hallway of flickering fluorescent lights, their wrists still bound. The young officer followed, uneasy, avoiding eye contact. A clerk behind the counter looked up as they entered. "What's the charge?" she asked. "Suspicious activity," the older cop replied. The clerk's brow furrowed. "Suspicious how?" He didn't answer. He just handed over the IDs again. She scanned them, typed something into the computer, and paused. Her expression shifted, from confusion to shock. Sergeant, you might want to take a look at this." The room grew tense. The officer leaned over, reading the screen. His face drained of color. Marcus stood quietly, watching. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. "Release them," the clerk said softly. "Now." But the older cop didn't move. "This has to be some mistake," he muttered, voice shaky now. "It's not," the clerk said firmly. "Captain Turner and Lieutenant Turner are active duty Air Force. Their base confirmed." A silence heavier than shame filled the room. The younger officer finally stepped forward, removing the cuffs from Marcus and Malik. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. I'm sorry, sir." Marcus rubbed his wrists, the marks deep and red. Malik stared at the older cop, the same man who, moments ago, had looked at him like an animal. Now he couldn't even meet their eyes. The clerk whispered something to another officer, who disappeared into a back room. Moments later, the station door opened, and in walked their superior officer, Colonel Abrams. He was furious. His voice boomed through the room. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" The older cop tried to explain, stammering. "They fit a description, there was a call." "Save it," the colonel snapped. "You didn't verify. You didn't check. You didn't think." He turned to the twins, his expression softening. "You two okay?" Marcus nodded slowly. "We're fine, sir." But they weren't. Not inside. The humiliation clung to them like a second skin. The colonel turned back to the officers. "Do you understand what this looks like? Two decorated Air Force officers, handcuffed in your parking lot because someone felt suspicious?" The silence said everything. Malik finally spoke. His voice was low but cutting. "You didn't see two men. You saw two threats." No one answered. The colonel led them out, his hand firm on Marcus's shoulder. But as they stepped into the night, the flashing lights of patrol cars still painted the ground around them, a reminder of what had just happened. The next morning, the story broke online. Someone from the bar had uploaded a video, shaky, grainy, but clear enough. The footage showed the twins being handcuffed, the crowd jeering, the officers shouting. The caption read, "Two black men arrested at O'Donnell's bar. Turns out, they were Air Force officers." It spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended, protests sparked, and suddenly the quiet town of Millstone was under a national microscope. The police department issued a statement calling it a misunderstanding. But the world wasn't buying it. Reporters camped outside the station. People demanded accountability. The older officer was placed on administrative leave, but to many, it felt like another hollow gesture. Marcus and Malik tried to return to duty, but everywhere they went, whispers followed. Their faces were on TV, their names in headlines. Some called them heroes. Others called them agitators. At night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He replayed every second in his mind, the lights, the voices, the cold cuffs. He'd faced danger overseas, but nothing felt as personal as this. Nothing hurt more than realizing your uniform couldn't protect you from your own country. Malik, on the other hand, turned his pain into purpose. He spoke out, on news shows, at universities, on base. His voice carried the anger Marcus couldn't show. "People think racism is gone," he said in one interview. "But it's not gone, it just changed its clothes." Their story became a rallying cry. Protests grew, voices rose, and suddenly, two brothers who just wanted a quiet drink became the face of a movement they never asked for. But with attention came threats. Anonymous messages. Letters. Words that cut deep. One morning, as Marcus walked to his car, he found a note under the windshield. It read, "You embarrassed good officers. Hope it was worth it." He crumpled it silently, but Malik saw the look in his eyes, the exhaustion, the doubt. "You did nothing wrong," Malik said. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah. But that doesn't mean they'll stop trying to make us feel like we did." Weeks later, an internal hearing was held. The department wanted to review procedures. The same officer who had arrested them sat across the room, eyes down, voice trembling as he apologized. Marcus listened. He wanted to believe the man was sorry. But forgiveness doesn't erase scars. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus stood tall, his uniform crisp, his voice steady. "You didn't just arrest two men," he said quietly. "You arrested an idea. You put handcuffs on everything this uniform is supposed to stand for. And that's something we can't ignore." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked. The truth hung heavy. Because this wasn't just about two brothers in a bar. It was about every moment people like them had been judged before being known, feared before being understood, and silenced before being heard. And though the night was long over, the echo of that injustice, those flashing lights, those hateful eyes, would stay with them forever. But the story wasn't finished. Because truth, once exposed, doesn't die quietly. It grows. It demands to be heard. And somewhere in that small town, beneath the same neon bar sign that started it all, change was beginning to stir. The day of the public hearing arrived with a storm. Rain fell in relentless sheets, soaking the steps of Millstone City Hall. People stood in clusters beneath umbrellas, holding signs that screamed "Justice for the Turner twins" and "Protect those who protect us." Cameras flashed. News vans lined the street. The town that once tried to bury the truth now couldn't escape it. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Every seat was filled, reporters, activists, veterans, townspeople. At the front of the room sat Marcus and Malik Turner, dressed in uniform. The same uniforms that should have commanded respect, yet weeks earlier, those same clothes had been replaced by cold metal cuffs. The older cop, Sergeant Dale Harkins, sat just a few feet away. His face was pale, lips pressed tight. He'd been suspended since the night of the arrest, but his expression still carried the same stubborn pride that had fueled everything. When the chairman called the session to order, silence fell. The air felt electric, heavy with expectation. Marcus sat rigid, his jaw tight. He hadn't slept the night before. Every memory replayed in his mind like static, the flashing lights, the humiliation, the quiet laughter from the crowd. But today, he wasn't just here for himself or Malik. He was here for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small in a place they had every right to belong. The first witness spoke, a woman from the bar who'd filmed the video. Her voice trembled as she described what she saw, how the officers had arrived with hands already on their weapons, how the crowd had cheered the arrest. "I didn't say anything that night," she whispered, tears glistening. "I was scared. But when I found out who they really were, I couldn't stay silent." The room murmured. Harkins shifted in his seat. Then it was Malik's turn. He stood, tall and unflinching. His voice carried a calm that demanded silence. "I've worn this uniform for 7 years," he began. "I've saluted the flag, buried friends under it, and believed that what we fight for abroad protects us at home. But that night, in my own country, that belief shattered." He paused, looking straight at Harkins. "You didn't see an officer. You didn't see a veteran. You saw a threat. You didn't ask questions. You assumed. You judged. And then you humiliated us in front of an entire town." The chairman nodded for him to continue. Malik's eyes swept across the crowd. "We were handcuffed, searched, accused, and shamed. And the only thing we were guilty of was being black in a place that decided that meant danger." The room erupted in whispers, some angry, some tearful. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood slower, his voice steadier, but heavy with pain. "When you've seen combat, you learn to read eyes. You learn what fear looks like. But that night, I saw something worse than fear. I saw contempt. I saw a man who decided before I said a word that I didn't belong." He inhaled sharply, his next word slicing through the room. "And I realized something, even a uniform can't armor you against racism." For a long moment, no one moved. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Then the board called Sergeant Harkins to the stand. He walked stiffly to the microphone, every step echoing against the floor. His lawyer stood nearby, whispering something, but Harkins brushed him off. "I made a mistake," he began, voice flat. "Things escalated. Maybe I misjudged the situation. Maybe?" Malik's voice broke the silence, sharp and furious. The chairman raised a hand for order, but Malik continued, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "You called backup for 2 unarmed men sitting in a bar. You cuffed us in front of strangers. You called our IDs fake. And you still say maybe?" Harkins looked down. "You don't understand what it's like out there. We get calls, we have to act fast." Marcus interrupted this time. "Act fast, or act fair. Because you didn't act fast, you acted blind. You didn't see the situation, you saw skin." The audience gasped. Harkins' face flushed. "You think I'm racist?" he shot back. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the man. "I think you're scared. And fear mixed with power, that's the most dangerous kind of racism there is." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Harkins' composure broke. His voice rose. "You people always turn everything into race." There it was. The words that stripped the mask off everything. Gasps filled the room. The chairman's gavel slammed down. But the damage was done. Malik stood still, eyes wide, as if those words had pulled him right back into that parking lot, under those same lights. His chest heaved. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. The chairman turned sharply to Harkins. "Sergeant, you will not." Harkins cut him off. "No, let me finish. I've done this job 20 years. You think it's easy? You think I get to second-guess every shadow, every movement, wondering if I'll make it home?" Marcus's voice dropped low. "And did you ever think that we wonder the same thing, every time a cop pulls us over, every time we walk into the wrong bar, every time we're reminded that to some people, our skin is the shadow?" Harkins fell silent. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Reporters typed furiously. The chairman called for a recess. But no one moved. No one could. The weight of what had just been said hung over the room like a verdict that needed no gavel. Outside, the protest had doubled. Chants echoed through the rain, "Justice for the Turners." No more silence. Inside, Marcus stepped into the hallway, his hands trembling. Malik followed, his anger replaced by exhaustion. "You think any of this will change anything?" Malik asked, voice low. Marcus stared at the rain running down the glass doors. "It has to." Before either could say more, a woman approached them, a reporter with a camera crew trailing behind. "Captain Turner, can you tell us what's going through your mind right now?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't a man of speeches. But this moment demanded one. "What's going through my mind?" he repeated softly. "The night I took my oath to serve this country, I believed I was protecting something bigger than myself. I believed we were all on the same side. But that night at the bar, I realized there are 2 versions of America. One that sees your uniform, and one that only sees your color." The reporter leaned closer. "And which one do you believe in now?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "I still believe in the first one. I have to. Because if I stop believing in it, then the second one wins." Hours later, the board reconvened. The chairman's tone was firm. "After reviewing the testimony, the footage, and the department's conduct, we find that Sergeant Dale Harkins is guilty of racial misconduct, abuse of authority, and violation of protocol." A roar of reaction filled the hall, cheers, gasps, disbelief. Harkins sat still, his face blank. For the first time, the weight of what he'd done seemed to register. But Marcus didn't smile. Malik didn't either. Because justice wasn't victory, it was just survival. The chairman continued, "Sergeant Harkins is hereby terminated from duty, effective immediately." The words echoed. The man who once held power over them now sat stripped of it. As the gavel fell, Malik exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Marcus stared ahead, his face unreadable. But before they could leave, Harkins stood. Wait. The room quieted. He turned to face them, rainwater streaking down the window behind him. You were right, he said, voice breaking. I saw you as a threat before I saw you as men. I can't take that back. But maybe now I understand what it feels like to be judged before speaking. His words hung in the air, half apology, half confession. Marcus nodded once. Understanding's a start. But change is the goal. And with that, he turned and walked out. Outside, the storm had cleared. The air smelled of rain and redemption. The crowd erupted as the twins stepped out, reporters shouting questions, protesters cheering, strangers clapping. But Marcus didn't wave. He just looked up at the sky, gray clouds breaking open to faint light. Malik stepped beside him. You think people will remember this? Marcus smiled faintly. They'll remember the video. The noise. But I hope they remember the silence, too. The silence of everyone who watched and said nothing, that's the part that has to change. The brothers walked toward their truck, the same one they'd been accused of stealing. The same one that now sat surrounded by supporters. As they climbed in, Marcus glanced once more at the bar down the road. The neon sign flickered again, just like that night. But this time, he didn't look away. He started the engine, the hum of it grounding him. Let's go home, he said softly. Malik nodded. Yeah. But not the same home we left. The truck rolled forward, tires splashing through puddles as the crowd chanted behind them. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt something shift, not in the town, but inside him. Because real change doesn't happen in hearings or headlines. It happens in hearts. In moments when someone finally sees what they'd chosen not to. And though the battle wasn't over, the truth had found its way into the open. But as the road stretched ahead, Malik glanced out the window, watching the patrol cars still parked nearby. They'll still see us the same way, he murmured. Marcus looked at him, eyes steady. Maybe. But now the world saw them, too. The truck disappeared into the distance, rain fading to sunlight, sirens replaced by silence. And for the first time, Millstone wasn't quiet out of ignorance, it was quiet out of reckoning. Because that night had changed everything. Two brothers went in as suspects. They came out as symbols. And somewhere, beyond the headlines, beyond the applause, one question still echoed through every home that watched their story. If truth wears a uniform, why does the color of skin still decide who's guilty first? The sirens eventually faded, leaving behind a hollow silence that felt heavier than any noise. The crowd that had once jeered, filmed, and whispered now stood in stunned disbelief. The same officers who had humiliated the twins only moments ago now avoided their eyes. The truth had surfaced, too late to erase the pain, too late to undo the damage, but just in time to expose something far deeper than a simple mistake. They weren't just two black men falsely accused in a bar. They were decorated officers, brothers in blood and in uniform. Serving a nation that, in that moment, had refused to see their humanity. The same badges they wore with pride had not protected them from the judgment written into the eyes of those who swore to uphold justice. As the bar emptied, one of the twins, Marcus, stood still, staring at the spot where he'd been forced to the floor. His hand still trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of realization. All his training, all his service, all the years he'd spent defending others, none of it had stopped what happened tonight. His uniform had not made him invisible to prejudice. Across the room, his brother, Malik, stood tall, his jaw clenched. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply met the eyes of the officers who'd pointed guns at them. Now you see us, his silence seemed to say. But even in that moment of vindication, there was no victory. Just exhaustion. Just truth. News spread quickly. Within hours, videos flooded the internet. Two men in plain clothes, face down, handcuffed in a small-town bar, and then, the twist, the same men standing in uniform, saluted by fellow soldiers, their ranks revealed. The world watched in disbelief. Some called it justice. Others called it embarrassment. But for the twins, it was neither. Justice would mean this never happening in the first place. The next morning, headlines exploded. Commentators debated. Social media raged. Some demanded the officers be fired, others defended them, calling it a misunderstanding. But beneath the noise, the deeper question hung heavy. If this can happen to men who wear the uniform, what happens to those who don't? Marcus and Malik didn't seek fame. They didn't want interviews, documentaries, or pity. They wanted a conversation that didn't end when the outrage did. They wanted change. Real change. Days later, they stood together in front of a camera, not as victims, but as witnesses. Marcus spoke softly, his voice steady yet burdened. That night wasn't about who we are. It was about what they saw. And that's the problem. They didn't see two soldiers. They saw two black men. Until that changes, nothing will. His words traveled far beyond the room where they were recorded. Schools, precincts, and even military bases replayed the clip. Some listened. Some didn't. But no one could say they hadn't heard it. Malik added, "We fight for a country that we love. We just hope one day, it'll love us back." That sentence broke the internet, not because it was poetic, but because it was painfully real. It echoed the unspoken truth of millions who had felt unseen, unheard, and undeserving of the very justice they defended. In the weeks that followed, investigations began. Apologies were issued. Promises were made. But promises can't heal scars. And though time passed, that night lived on, not in anger, but as a reminder. For the twins, life moved forward, but differently. The world now saw them through two lenses, heroes to some, symbols to others. But at the core, they remained what they had always been, brothers who believed in service, faith, and hope. Every time they passed a patrol car now, they felt a silent question between them, would it happen again? And though they never said it aloud, both knew the answer wasn't simple. Because the truth is, racism doesn't vanish with exposure. It hides. It adapts. It waits. The bar where it all happened eventually closed down. Some said it was bad for business. Others said it was karma. But the twins never went back. They didn't need to. That night wasn't a place, it was a lesson. It taught them that courage isn't always found on the battlefield. Sometimes, it's found in standing tall when the world tries to make you kneel. And it taught the world something, too, that silence is never neutral. Every witness in that bar, every person who said nothing while injustice unfolded before their eyes, carried a share of that guilt. The night showed that racism doesn't always wear a uniform, it hides in glances, in silence, in the moments people choose not to speak. Years later, when Marcus was asked what stayed with him the most, he said, the sound. Not of the cuffs. Not of the shouting. But the silence of everyone who watched and did nothing. That silence is what he vowed to break. And so, the twins began visiting schools, precincts, and community centers, telling their story, not for sympathy, but for awareness. Because stories have power. They can open eyes where statistics can't. They can reach hearts where arguments fail. They told people that what happened to them wasn't unique. It was a mirror. And what that mirror reflects is uncomfortable, but necessary to see. Their story became more than an incident. It became a movement, one that reminded people that justice without equality is just a word. And maybe that's what the world needed to hear, not another apology, but a challenge. A challenge to every viewer, every listener, every bystander. When you see injustice, what will you do? Will you speak, or will you stay silent like the crowd in that bar? Because silence, too, is a choice. Tonight, the twins sleep peacefully, not because the world has changed, but because they have. They know their story reached places laws couldn't. They know their pain sparked conversations that might one day save someone else. And maybe, that's enough for now. But for the rest of us, the question remains. How many more Marcus and Maliks must there be before the world learns to see beyond skin? How many more uniforms, badges, or sacrifices before humanity becomes the standard, not the exception? The night they were humiliated should have broken them. Instead, it broke the illusion that equality is something already achieved. And so, as their story echoes across screens and hearts, one truth lingers, clear, haunting, and undeniable. Racism doesn't need permission to exist. It needs silence to survive. So don't stay silent. Share their story. Speak up. Because the change they fought for, the justice they stood for, begins not in power, but in people. In you.